You know, some people say that time heals everything, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes time just puts a bandage over a wound that never really stops aching. Let me take you back a little bit. I'm a 46-year-old single mom with 2 daughters. One's 17, the other 15. And they're good girls, smart, tough, but like any kids, they've been through more than they should have had to. See, their father, my ex-husband, passed away in a car accident last year. Tragic, yes, but I'll be honest with you. That loss didn't come with just grief. It came tangled in betrayal, lies, and a storm of drama that still hasn't quite settled. You see, before he died, I found out that he'd been cheating on me. For how long? I don't know. Long enough to get another woman pregnant, with not just 1 child, but 2 twin boys. And if that wasn't enough of a punch to the gut, the woman he had the affair with, behind 2 little boy orphans. And now, I know what you might be thinking. Those boys didn't ask for any of this, and you'd be right. But trauma doesn't make things logical. My daughters, they were the ones who discovered their father's affair. They're the ones who told me. Imagine that, your own children uncovering the truth about their dad's double life. That kind of betrayal hits differently when it lands on young hearts. So no, they don't have warm, fuzzy feelings toward those boys. They see them as a living reminder of the wreckage their father left behind. That's not fair to anyone, but it's real. And they're working through it. With a therapist. With time. Now, here's where things get even messier. My ex-husband's parents, my ex-in-laws, decided they weren't done meddling in our lives. They didn't just want a relationship with my girls. No. They wanted custody, full-blown custody. They tried to drag us into court, claiming we weren't letting them see their grandkids enough. And as if that wasn't bold enough, they also tried to move in with us. Can you imagine? These people who knew all about their son's cheating, who enabled it, who've said some of the most vile things to me and my daughters, wanting to share our roof. That was never going to happen. Over my dead body, the custody case, still ongoing. But I'll fight that battle to the bitter end because my girls have been through enough. They deserve peace, they deserve stability, not more manipulation disguised as love. So there we were, a family that had already been torn apart by Bitoyaru, now being picked at by the vultures of guilt, religious righteousness, and control. I thought the worst of it was behind us. But oh, I was wrong. It was supposed to be a simple day. Just me and my girls, walking through the weekend farmers market in town. A place filled with the scent of fresh bread, laughter from neighbors, and the hum of small joy. The market's kind of a tradition for us. We go there for fresh produce, eggs, local meats, sometimes handmade crafts. But this day was extra special. It was my youngest daughter's birthday. Now, she didn't want a big party just yet. We had one planned for later in the month. But I thought, why not give her a little freedom, a bit of birthday fun on her own terms? So I gave her a small budget and told her she could go wild with it. And let me tell you, that girl beelined straight for every chocolate stall and candy booth in sight, giggling, picking out sweet after sweet. It was beautiful watching her just be a kid again. For a moment, things felt normal. But peace is a funny thing in my life. It never seems to last long. After about an hour, I realized I hadn't seen her for a while. At first, I didn't panic. She's responsible, smart, and we've been to this market dozens of times. But the feeling in my stomach, that mother's instinct, started to twist and tighten. Just as I pulled out my phone to call her, it rang. It was her. I picked up immediately, and what I heard froze me in my tracks. She was crying. She said some weird old ladies had cornered her and were yelling at her. I could barely understand her through the tears, but I caught enough. They were saying she was a bad sister, that she was going to hell for not seeing her grandparents, that she was unChristian. I told her to stay on the line and started sprinting, dragging my older daughter behind me. We ran through the crowd, weaving past produce stands and flower carts until we spotted her. And my heart sank. There she was, standing near a stall with her little basket of sweets, surrounded by a half circle of 6 older women, church ladies, the kind that wear pastel cardigans and pearls and think they have God's phone number on speed dial. They were towering over her, pointing fingers, their voices harsh and full of judgment. I could hear one of them say, "What kind of girl turns her back on family?" Another hissed, "You should be helping raise your baby brothers. Those poor boys are orphans." And there my baby stood, clutching her bag, tears running down her cheeks, utterly humiliated. They had no shame, no decency. They were strangers to her, just friends of my ex-mother-in-law from her church. But they came at my daughter like a pack of wolves dressed as lambs. I saw red. I shoved my way into the circle without a second of hesitation. My older daughter followed close behind, and I told her in a low voice, "Take your sister, pay for her things. Go to the car." She nodded and pulled her sister away gently, leaving me alone with the choir of judgment. And then I let them have it. I told them calmly at first that what they were doing was cruel, that they had no right to speak to a child, my child, like that. But they doubled down. One woman, whom I vaguely remembered from a few years back at church events, looked me in the eye and said, "You've failed as a mother. You refuse to obey your husband's parents like a Christian wife would. Your daughters are selfish, and so are you." That's when calm went out the window. I told them in no uncertain terms that if they ever approached my daughters again, I'd make sure every one of them was facing harassment charges. I reminded them that neither I nor my children were part of their church anymore, and that they had no moral high ground, not when they were being used like puppets by a bitter old woman who couldn't control her own family, so she decided to try and control mine. They started yelling louder. It turned into a shouting match. Vendors and shoppers were staring. One man near the honey stall started recording on his phone. Eventually, security asked all of us to leave. Not just them, me too. So I turned on my heel and walked toward the parking lot, head high. But those women, they followed me, like a flock of pastel-colored vultures, walking 10 feet behind me, muttering curses and scripture like some kind of righteous parade. I got into the car. My girls were quite shaken. My youngest had red, puffy eyes, still clutching the chocolate she bought with her birthday money. I locked the doors and drove away without saying a word. But inside, I was seething, because this wasn't just about me anymore. They had come for my children. They'd crossed a line they never should have dared approach. And if my ex-mother-in-law thought she could manipulate the church into turning against us, well, she had no idea what kind of storm she was about to bring down on herself. That night, after I got my girls settled into bed, after I'd hugged them a little tighter and told them everything was going to be okay, I sat down at the kitchen table. My tea went cold. My thoughts were hotter than hellfire. Couldn't sleep. My mind kept playing back my daughter's voice on the phone, choked up, scared, confused, and the image of those women circling her like predators in broad daylight. I couldn't let it go. I got online. Now I still keep in touch with a few people from my ex-old church. Not many, just 1 or 2 decent folks who stayed neutral when things fell apart. One of them, a kind man who always kept his head down during church politics, happened to be online. I messaged him, told him what happened at the market, every detail. He was horrified, apologized up and down, even though he had nothing to do with it. That's just the kind of man he is. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He told me why those women had come after my daughter. Apparently, my ex-mother-in-law, that sweet old lady with the Bible in one hand and a dagger in the other, had posted a massive sob story in the church's private Facebook group. The kind of thing that tugs on heartstrings and clouds judgment. She painted herself and her husband as abandoned, helpless victims. Said I'd cut them off, left them penniless and homeless after her beloved son died. She claimed they were suffering while I lived comfortably off his life insurance, as if I'd stolen it right from their hands. And then, The part that made me want to scream. She said my daughters had turned their backs on them, that they refused to talk to their grandparents or care for their poor orphaned baby brothers. But she didn't stop there. No, she told the group that those little boys, the twins, were our surrogate children, that I supposedly couldn't have more kids. So her generous son and his brave friend stepped in to give us the sons we always wanted. And I had rejected them because they were boys. Let me repeat that. She said I abandoned 2 babies because I wanted daughters, as if I were the villain in some twisted fairy tale. Now, here's the part that almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because of how absurdly desperate she was. This church, well, it's got a lot of problems. It's not exactly known for its progressive thinking, especially when it comes to LGBTQ+ folks or modern family dynamics. But there is one thing they are absolutely uncompromising about: infidelity. Cheating, whether it's the husband or the wife, is considered one of the ultimate sins in that community, a serious biblical-level offense. So my ex-mother-in-law had to lie. She couldn't say her son cheated, because then he would have been the sinner. So instead, she spun a fantasy, a story about love, sacrifice, and betoriaru, all directed at me. And wouldn't you know it, the more radical members of the church ate it up. They sent her support, sympathy, prayers, encouragement to forgive me. One even suggested she sue me for emotional damages. But the part that really burned me up, the harassment at the market, it wasn't random. Those women weren't acting on their own. They were sent, inspired, riled up by that post. They truly believed they were carrying out a righteous mission, defending a poor, grieving grandmother from her evil daughter-in-law and those ungrateful girls. It was disgusting, and I realized something right there in that moment. She wasn't just trying to ruin my name. She wasn't just trying to guilt my daughters. She was trying to rewrite history, to turn my family's trauma into her redemption arc. But she made one crucial mistake. She assumed I'd stay quiet, that I'd tuck my tail between my legs like a proper Christian wife and take the shame. But what she didn't realize was that I still had every single piece of evidence, every lie, every message, every photo from the day her saintly son betrayed us. And I wasn't about to let her weaponize her church against my daughters without a fight. She wanted to play this game. I was going to show her exactly how dangerous truth can be when you bury it under a lie. Now, let me tell you something I've learned over the years. Sometimes the very people who scream the loudest about morality are the ones hiding the darkest mess under their own rugs. That church, it claimed to be a pillar of virtue, a place of forgiveness, community, and truth. But what it really was, especially the little inner circle my ex-in-laws belonged to, was a gossip hive dressed in Sunday best. And like any hive, it had its rules. Some they ignored, some they bent, but others? Well, those were carved into stone, sacred and unquestionable. And that's where I saw the weakness. Because if there's one thing that church is absolutely fanatical about, it's faithfulness in marriage. Cheating? Nope. Doesn't matter how successful you are, how generous, or how long you've attended. If you've been unfaithful, you're marked. There's no sweeping that under the rug with a few Hail Marys or donation checks. In their eyes, cheating is a sin that brands you and anyone who supports it. Guilty by association. And that right there, that was the crack in the armor. You see, when my ex-husband was still alive, we were in the middle of a divorce. He had been cheating on me, openly, carelessly, for a long time. And not just with anyone either. This was a full-blown affair, one that led to 2 children, twin boys with another woman. I had the receipts. Oh boy, did I have them. Photos of him with her, right in our own home. Screenshots of text messages so crude I had to scroll past quickly if my girls were in the room. Emails between him and his parents, laughing about the affair, even justifying it because apparently I wasn't being grateful enough as a wife, as if gratitude excused betrayal. And let's not forget the messages from my ex-in-laws calling my daughters bastards, blame them for their father's death because they were the ones who told me about the affair. They actually said, and I quote, that his stress from the divorce is what killed him. Imagine the cruelty, blaming grieving teenagers for the death of their father. Just vile. I never released those messages during the divorce. I didn't need to. I just wanted to separate and move on. But now, with my girls being harassed in public, lied about online, and dragged through the mud, now I had a reason, and thanks to that church's obsession with moral purity, I had leverage. You see, my ex-mother-in-law had made a tactical error. She knew the church wouldn't support her son if they knew he was an adulterer. So she didn't just lie by omission. She created a whole alternate reality. She told the church her son didn't cheat, that the twins were the result of a surrogacy arrangement between her loving, infertile daughter-in-law, me, and a selfless woman, his mistress. She even said I rejected the babies because I hated boys. Disgusting, right? But here's where it gets interesting, because by building that lie, she tied herself and her reputation directly to the purity of that story. Her entire victim narrative rested on one crucial point, that her son had not sinned. So if I could prove that lie wrong, not just prove the affair, but show she knew about it, enabled it, and attacked my children for it, then I wouldn't just discredit her, I'd unravel her entire mask. Because in a place like that church, cheating isn't just a scandal, it's a social death sentence. It doesn't matter how old you are, how much Bible you quote, or how many casseroles you bring to the Sunday potluck. If you knowingly support sin and lie about it to the congregation, you're done. And that was the beauty of it. She'd weaponized that church community to shame and attack my daughters, and now I was going to use their own rules to expose her. But I wasn't just going to go online and argue with her. No. I was going to make it personal, visual, and undeniable. I was going to tell the truth in a way so loud, so clear, and so damning that it would make even the gossips in the back pew drop their hymnals. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protecting my daughters and finally making sure the people who hurt them felt the weight of what they'd done. Now, here's something you'll learn in life. When people lie about you long enough and loud enough, the truth stops being a quiet thing you carry inside. It becomes something you owe yourself and the people you love to prove. And I was done letting lies paint over our truth. That night, after the chaos at the market and the horrifying online smear campaign, I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the quiet of my living room, watching my daughters sleep through the baby monitor like I used to when they were little. They were safe in their rooms, but not really. Not when rumors were hunting them down like wolves outside. I opened the drawer I hadn't touched since the divorce began, the one where I kept the truth, and slowly, piece by piece, I began to gather the receipts. Now, I don't mean a few texts or a couple of angry voicemails. I mean a treasure trove of evidence, a paper trail so rich in detail it could have been a documentary. Let me walk you through it. First came the photos, dozens of them. Some were selfies they'd taken themselves, my ex and his mistress, in our house, on our couch, in the same kitchen where I'd once cooked dinner while he texted her under the table. One picture, I'll never forget, showed them kissing right in front of the fireplace I decorated every Christmas, her lipstick still on his cheek, their faces clear as day. Next, the text messages, not just between my ex and the other woman, but between him and his parents, the ones where they laughed about how liberated he felt being with someone less uptight, and how I had it coming for being so cold. They talked about the affair like it was a joke, like our marriage, our family, my daughters, were all a failed experiment he was relieved to be rid of. Then came the emails, There was one in particular that made my hands shake. Sent 2 days after my ex died. My ex-mother-in-law, in her own words, called my daughters selfish little bastards and say had blood on their hands because they'd told me about the affair, which led to the divorce, which in her twisted logic caused his accident. Imagine reading that about your children, 2 grieving girls blamed for their father's death. It still makes my stomach turn. But I wasn't done. I even pulled up voicemails where my ex-in-laws berated me, demanded I let them move in, claimed I was robbing them of their grandsons, even though the boys weren't mine, and they knew it. And because I'm nothing if not thorough, I also printed court documents from the divorce, legal records proving that I filed because of adultery, that my daughters were traumatized, that custody was being contested, not because I was unfit, but because they were trying to take my girls from me. I wasn't about to hand over scraps. No, this was going to be ironclad. So the next morning I took everything, and headed to a professional print shop. I didn't want cheap paper and blurry ink. I wanted high-quality, glossy prints, the kind that made you stop and look, the kind that made it real. And while I was there, an idea came to me, something poetic, something that would drive the point home with the elegance and clarity of a sermon. Instead of stuffing it all in a manila folder or a brown envelope, I'd make binders, personalized, crafted like little church hymn books. You know the kind, soft covers, printed verses inside, neatly bound, the kind of thing a good Christian would pick up without thinking twice. But when they opened these, they wouldn't find scripture. They'd find my ex-husband and his mistress locked in an embrace mid-kiss, their names printed underneath like the cover of a romance novel. Ex-husband's name and affair partner's name, a love story. Every binder was carefully arranged. Each section, photos, texts, emails, and those god-awful messages, separated with labeled tabs. I even included dates and annotations just in case anyone tried to claim this was doctored or exaggerated. I spent hours, literal hours, putting them together, not because I was being petty, but because this wasn't revenge. It was a statement. You tried to ruin me. You tried to ruin my daughters. Now I'm going to show the world who you really are. Now, I've always believed that you can tell a lot about a person not by how they throw a punch, but how they deliver a message. Loud people scream, smart people whisper, and the ones who've been really hurt, they write symphonies with silence. So picture this. It's a quiet Sunday morning. The sun is coming through the windows, casting golden streaks across the kitchen. My daughters are still sleeping, and I've got a box in my trunk that doesn't like much, but inside it, truth. Beautifully printed, painfully real truth, bound in what looks like the most innocent thing you could imagine. Church hymn books. You see, I knew this church. I'd been there for years when I was married, long enough to know their routines, their rhythm, and most importantly, their blind spots. At the back of the sanctuary, tucked beside the pews and the donation envelopes, is a humble little table. Nothing special, just a resting place for borrowed Bibles, volunteer sign-up sheets, and those soft-covered hymn packets they pass around during service. Visitors who forget theirs, they just grab one from the pile. No questions, no names. Perfect. That's where I went, quietly, just before the early service started. Dressed simple, hair tied back, not drawing attention to myself, just another face in the crowd. I walked into that church like I still belonged, box in hand, and headed straight to the back table. And just like that, no one batted an eye. They were too busy shaking hands, sipping coffee, saying God bless, to notice what I was sliding onto the table. Not hymn books, binders, 12 of them, each crafted to look just right. Soft cover, modest title font, but inside, page 1 hit you like a sermon to the chest. A full-color photo of my ex-husband lip-locked with his mistress, their arms wrapped around each other in my living room. Right under that image, their names, bold and unapologetic. A love story written in betrayal. Flip the page, and you'd find the digital sins of a man who preached family but practiced infidelity. His texts, his emails, and worst of all, the messages from my ex-in-laws. Those sweet old folks who'd convinced their entire congregation that I was a heartless woman turning her back on family. But now, now they'd hear what really happened. I even included captions, little reminders of what each document showed. In one photo, I wrote, "Taken during our marriage, while I was home with the flu." In a printed text message, note how he calls her his real family. I was still paying the mortgage. It wasn't just revenge. It was curated justice. And I walked out of there that morning without a single soul knowing what I'd done. But by Monday morning, that church Facebook page, it was on fire. People who'd praised my ex-mother-in-law for being a God-fearing widow were suddenly commenting with confusion, anger, even disgust. Some posts were taken down within hours. But screenshots? Oh, those live forever. One woman said, "I thought she was protecting her grandkids, but she called them bastards? Who does that?" Another wrote, "Wait, didn't she say the affair partner was a surrogate?" These photos say otherwise. Even the pastor had to jump in, trying to calm the storm, asking for grace and patience. But the damage was done. Gossip in a small church moves faster than wildfire in dry grass. Whispers turned to gasps. Support turned to side eyes. And those hymn book binders, they became legend. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to confront anyone. I simply let the truth do what it does best, shine. And here's the best part. I never signed my name, never posted a thing, never claimed responsibility, but everyone knew. They knew who had the receipts. They knew who refused to stay quiet. And most of all, they knew that this quiet, grieving widow they tried to paint as a villain, she was smarter than they ever gave her credit for. There's something quiet and cruel about the way karma works. It doesn't rush. It doesn't roar. It waits, patient, watchful, and then it moves with all the certainty of a coming storm. And in this case, karma came wrapped in hymn books and holy shame. See, by the time Monday rolled around, word had already started to spread. Not just whispers behind the church pews, but full-blown fireside gossip across text chains, Facebook groups, and neighborhood prayer circles. The congregation didn't just hear what was in those binders, they devoured it. And what they found didn't sit right with them. My ex-mother-in-law, who had painted herself as the grieving, abandoned matriarch, was now exposed for what she truly was. The Facebook lies she had crafted, the sympathy she'd harvested, all of it turned to ash in an instant. The betrayal they read about wasn't some vague moral failing. No, it was personal, raw. Her son, the same man they'd honored in death, was now seen as a cheating hypocrite. And she, a woman who helped him hide the truth while blaming children for their father's death. Let that sink in. She called my daughters, the very girls she claimed to love, bastards, blamed them for her son's affair being exposed, claimed they were unchristian for not embracing the affair partner's orphaned son's children, born from the very betrayal that tore our family apart. The churchgoers weren't just angry, they were disgusted. And trust me, this wasn't the kind of congregation that forgives quietly. Remember, this was a group that preached hard morals, especially on marriage and faithfulness. They could forgive poverty, they could forgive illness, but cheating, that was sacred ground, that was unforgivable. So the response was swift. By Tuesday, my ex-mother-in-law's social media turned from sentimental posts to desperate rants. She tried to downplay it, claimed it was all lies, that I had fabricated the binders out of spite. But it was too late. The photos were real. The text messages had names, dates, timestamps. The handwriting was hers, her words, her bitterness, all printed in black and white. She even tried to delete her previous posts from the church group. But you know how people are. Once they see scandal, they screenshot everything. And once you lose the moral high ground in a place like that, you don't get it back. Not with a Facebook apology, not with tears in the pastor's office, not when you use the church to lie. Soon, her circle shrank. The weekly brunch invites stopped. The ladies she gossiped with during choir practice began sitting a little further away. Even the extremist members, those who had blindly supported her, went quiet. They felt duped, because what they saw wasn't just a bitter old woman. It was a master manipulator who used the language of faith to hide her family's sins and chain two teenage girls who had already lost their father. And then came the final blow. That next Sunday, she didn't show up. Her husband did alone. Sat at the far end of the back pew, barely greeted, not a soul offering him a handshake after service. No warm smiles, no welcome backs, just eyes, watching, judging. And by the week after that, he didn't show up either. They were gone. Just like that, exiled not by force, but by the power of collective shame. They didn't get a formal removal, no grand confrontation. That's not how these churches work. The shunning is social. It's cold shoulders. It's being left off the prayer list. It's silence that chokes. My ex-mother-in-law later posted one last message on her personal page, a pitiful cry for attention masked as wisdom. She wrote, "No one cares for the elderly anymore. If my son were still alive, none of this would have happened. He would have taken care of us like good children are supposed to." The irony, it was never about being cared for. It was about control. Control over my daughters, over my home, over the narrative. And when she lost that control, when the truth broke through, she had nothing left but martyrdom. But even that didn't work this time, because this time, the truth came in clear, high-gloss paper. No one could twist it. No one could deny it. And while I never said a word to that church, not in person, not online, they all knew exactly who had pulled the curtain back, not out of malice, not for drama, but for justice. There's a silence that follows humiliation, a silence deeper than any shout, colder than any rejection. And for my ex-in-laws, that silence wasn't just emotional, it became public. They weren't exiled with loud announcements or dramatic excommunications. No, the church didn't need to make an official decree. This kind of punishment didn't need formalities. It came from within the pews, from the very people who once embraced them with potlucks and Sunday smiles. The gossip had long since boiled over. The prayer binders had worked their quiet magic. By the time the dust settled, the churchgoers weren't debating if my ex-in-laws were guilty. They were debating how they could have been so easily fooled for so long. You see, people in tight-knit religious communities are funny. They're loyal until they feel betrayed. And once they realize the extent of the lies, the deceit, the manipulation, well, there was no going back. One of the choir ladies, someone who had known my ex-mother-in-law for over a decade, was overheard saying, "I invited that woman into my home, and she sat there and lied right through her teeth while holding my baby." The betrayal wasn't just about moral failure. It was personal. That kind of thing cuts deep. They were no longer seen as grieving grandparents. They were the people who supported their cheating son's double life, lied about a fake surrogacy to cover up his affair, harassed two teenage girls mourning their father, tried to guilt their way into custody, inheritance, and control. That's not a sob story. That's a cautionary tale. At first, the ex-in-laws tried to pretend nothing was wrong. They showed up to church like usual, well-dressed, heads held high. But it was different. The pews around them didn't fill. Conversations ended when they approached. The pastor kept his distance. And when prayer circles were formed, No one reached for their hands. Then came the subtle signs of the shunning. No invites to church socials. No more bless your heart greetings after the service. No more casseroles dropped off at their door. The community that had once wrapped them in warmth had now turned its back, because even the most pious group has a breaking point, and they had crossed it. And my ex-mother-in-law, once the ringleader of this moral charade, could no longer take it. She posted one final, desperate message online, a public cry coated in guilt-tripping and fake nostalgia. No one cares about the elderly anymore. My son would have protected us. He loved us. He would have done what was right. But even her most loyal defenders had gone silent, because by now everyone knew the truth. Her son, the great man she mourned, had cheated, lied, abandoned his family, and dragged his parents into his dirty mess. And instead of owning any of it, they tried to rewrite history, to make themselves victims of their own actions. The post got a few pity likes, a couple of generic praying for you comments, but that was it. No one showed up at their door. No one invited them back. No one asked for their side of the story. They weren't just isolated. They were forgotten. The final blow wasn't loud. It didn't come with fire and fury. It came in whispers, in cold glances, in the slow, inevitable decay of their influence. It came from a community that once embraced them, now quietly shutting every door they used to walk through. They had used their son's death, their grandchildren's pain, and a sacred community to wage a war of lies, and they lost. And me, I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to respond. The truth did the talking for me. You know, sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom gavel slamming down or someone being dragged away in handcuffs. Sometimes justice is quieter. It's a mother being able to tuck her daughters into bed without fearing the next attack. It's seeing the people who caused you pain finally answer to the truth, not through revenge or violence, but by their own lies unraveling in front of the world they once deceived. That's the kind of justice I got. When I look back now, I don't just see the betrayal. I see how far we've come since. My daughters, those brave, grieving, angry girls, are healing. They still carry scars, sure, but they're not wounds anymore. They're reminders of what they survived and who they've become. We don't talk about their father much, and honestly, I think that's okay. He made his choices, and in the end, those choices spoke louder than any apology he never gave. My ex-in-laws, I don't check up on them. I don't need to. They've been left to sit in the echo of their own manipulations. The same community they tried to turn against us now wants nothing to do with them. They created the stage, performed their story, and the curtain fell on a standing ovation for our side. I don't rejoice in their isolation. That's not who I am. But I'll admit seeing the truth rise to the surface after so many lies, it's a kind of peace I didn't think I'd ever feel. And here's the thing, I didn't need to scream louder than them. I didn't need to match their cruelty. I just needed to be steady, smart, and above all, honest. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's clarity. It's showing the world exactly who they are and letting their own actions finish the story for you. And when the dust finally settled, when the last whisper in that church faded, my daughters and I were still standing, stronger, closer. So yes, justice was served, not by force, not by fury, but by the undeniable, unstoppable power of the truth. And that, my friends, is the sweetest ending of all.